Hey everyone, good afternoon. This is Pam. I am here today with another interviewee, and I'm really super excited for this one. We just met moments ago online, but we've been talking a lot in the last few years because this is Madison Erin Mayfield, who is my cover artist for the Megan Montaigne books. These are the books, and I'll bring this up again. These covers, they're so gorgeous. I love them so much. And also, just FYI, I did. If you were here last week, you know I had a problem with the echo. I got my earbuds, and they're not working. So I'm hoping that we're gonna make this work okay. But hopefully there won't be too much echo. Oh, but last time people turned their volume down if they had problems, and that seemed to help. Anyway, without any further ado, welcome, Madison. Hi.
Hi,
How are you?
I'm good. It's so good to meet you virtually.
It's so fun to meet you. And you're in Seattle now. You weren't
I
before.
am. Yes, I am Seattle. I've only been back for about a month, so I was living in Australia before, but I'm back in Seattle now.
Excellent. Okay, well, we'll get to that because I'm so curious about what you were doing in Australia. But I want to
Yep.
start by telling people how I found you because it was sort of kismet. It was wonderful. When I was working on A Conventional Murder, which was my second Megan Montaigne book, I was looking for cover artists, and I knew that I already knew my next book was going to be The Caramel Crow. Like, I already had the title in my head. And I thought, whoever I get to do my cover, because I totally knew what I wanted in my head, but I can't draw. So I thought, whoever I want all my covers to be the same person. So I started looking really early. Because I thought, oh, it'll take forever to find someone who can draw a crow. And then just magically, I found Madison, and she does just amazing natural science illustration. And you can tell me, is that the right term? Natural science illustration?
Yeah, totally. There's a few different terms, but yeah, that's a
Yeah.
good one.
And I asked you, well, could you also do other things? Because I need this one, and you said sure. So Madison became the Megan Montaigne cover artist, and let's look at those covers again. They're so gorgeous. I just am in love with every time. I mean, the detail is perfect, and um, it makes me so happy. Every time any of my cover artists sends me art, I'm always just like giddy inside because of how pretty they are. So those are the covers. So thank you for having made such gorgeous covers. Are these the first covers you've done?
Yes, they are. Yeah, it's the first, and it was actually like one of the first illustrations I've done for a book, actually, which was really exciting. But yeah, it was my first cover art, which was really cool. So thank you.
So fun. Would you do it
Yeah,
again? Has it been a good experience?
definitely. Yeah, you're great to work with. Can
Good.
recommend.
Excellent. Well, let's
Yeah.
start by talking about the crows because that's how I found you, is through actually a local University of Washington crow specialist, and you did some work for her too. And I should have put it up, but I don't have it. But tell me about like how do people find you to do so? Well, let's talk about, first of all, what is scientific illustration?
Mhm. Yeah, so scientific illustration, I think it can be considered a lot of things, but traditionally it's um, kind of really simple illustrations of different species of flora or fauna, and it was used to like identify species. Now it's kind of broadened into like paleo art, medical illustration, or just kind of any illustration work that communicates science. It doesn't have to be super traditional like field guides or anything. Um, so yeah, it's kind of a broader term nowadays, I think. And so people call themselves like scientific illustrators, and then you can specify within that as well. So a lot of people specify in paleo art, so like illustrating extinct species, or people specify in medical illustration. Um, so yeah, people also call it natural science illustration, natural history illustration, but there's a lot of different ways to get into it and different kind of topics you can focus on.
So how did you get into it?
Um, I don't. It was kind of random. I did my undergrad at the University of Washington and I was doing conservation biology. And I did a little bit of work in a lab. They worked on the genomics of lizards, and I kind of realized it was not my thing. I didn't really want to be doing research necessarily, especially if it meant I had to do lab work. And so I graduated and I was kind of unsure where I was going to go next. And then I found out that UW actually had a scientific illustration degree, or it was kind of like it's a year-long course. So it's considered continuing education. It's not a full undergrad degree. But I was kind of working in the city and had graduated and was like, well, I'll apply for that because why not? And so I went through that, and it was just night classes, and I just loved it so much. And then I started to get, requests for commissions, and it started to pick up. And I was like, okay, I can actually do this maybe for a living. And it just kind of all fell into place. It's like the perfect way for me to be doing science or be adjacent to science, but not do research because I didn't feel like I fit into like academia necessarily.
So
Yeah.
you must have been an artist though beforehand, because you can't like just suddenly, oh, they have a course in scientific illustration, I'm just going to do that now. So I have a cousin who is an artist, and I know when we were little, he's a couple years younger than I am, like he would always be drawing, and he drew a lot of skulls and a lot of hands, which I realized like much later is probably about getting into the structure of things. Or but tell me about your artistic path. When were you first drawing, and what was it about the drawing? Because I admire artists so much. I can't at all.
Yeah. It's weird because I was never that person who like always had to be drawing. I did do art when I was younger, obviously, because you would take it in school and, everybody did it. But I wasn't necessarily like the kid who was always painting on the side. And then in high school, I did ballet. I was a dancer.
Oh,
So
fun.
I didn't really do a lot of like traditional art forms. And then when I got into college, I started kind of sketching a bit more. I started to take upper level ornithology courses, and we used a lot of field guides. And that's when I saw all the illustrations in the field guides and was like, oh, I can draw the things I'm learning about in class. So I kind of started to pick it up again. Um, but yeah, when I applied to the program, I hadn't been doing that much art really, and I was never necessarily trained in traditional art forms. And
Really?
that's why I think scientific illustration's really awesome because in my program, there were some people who had art backgrounds and had like undergrad degrees from art colleges. But then there were a lot of people who were science based and had no art experience. And so it's one of those fields
Wow.
that you can teach yourself and you just have to practice a lot. So yeah, it's kind of weird that I fell into it. My grandpa was an artist and my mom is good at drawing. So maybe I did kind of inherit that. But a lot of it comes from just practicing. And the more you do it, the better you get. So,
I was just showing some of your art.
huh.
There's a blue jay, a snake, a cassowary, and a pine cone. They're just gorgeous. So you did not have a big background in that already.
No, not at all. It's a lot of people are like, I can't draw. And, there are varying degrees of like the skill you start with. But I've seen people who've, even myself, somewhere on my Instagram, I have a post. I had found this sketch of a kingfisher that I had done probably like 7 or 8 years ago. And I was doing it to put into my portfolio to apply to the illustration program. And then probably like 2 years ago, I was commissioned to paint the same species of kingfisher. And I compared the two, and it's like night and day.
Oh
I
my
can't
gosh.
believe that the first one I did, I was like using that to apply to a program. But it's crazy how much you can improve. So, some people, it's hard to start off and continue to force yourself to practice and get better, but you really do improve over time. So,
So how, because again, I have tried, and obviously I haven't tried long enough, because but how do you, when you, like, let's say you're looking at a blue jay,
hmm.
what's your process? How do you start drawing? Do you, just tell me how, from step one?
So step one is I find a lot of reference photos, like a lot. My laptop is constantly telling me it has no room left on my hard drive because I just have folders of reference photos. Um, because when you're illustrating, you can illustrate like an exact copy of a photo, but you have to be wary of copyright.
Right.
So you can really only do that if you've contacted the photographer and they've given you the go ahead.
Yeah.
Um, so you're using a lot of references. Sometimes, if it's something I can see in person, I'll go try and observe it. I was lucky with the blue jay. My dad has a bunch in his backyard, and I was there when I was working on that.
Yeah.
So that was a fun excuse to go birding. But yeah, I start with references and observing if I can. And then I kind of try to think of the general pose I want a subject in. So I guess I think of the composition first. And then from there, I just start sketching. You do see a lot of illustrators who use the really like formal, or I guess traditional technique of like drawing a bunch of circles and then like connecting them kind of. I've never been able to figure that out or use that technique.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, so I just kind of just start by just trying to draw it, and I'll be erasing and changing parts of it, constantly trying to get the proportions right. Um, a really helpful technique for me is thinking of the negative space.
Yeah.
So if you see an image of a bird, trying to like look at the space behind it to draw the outline instead of only focusing on the bird, if that makes sense.
Yeah, but I can't imagine
Kind of.
that's easier.
Yeah, it just helps you with proportions because sometimes you'll draw something and you'll go, that's good, but it looks a little off. And if you focus on the negative space, you might notice like, oh, my spacing between the eye and the beak is wrong or something along those lines. But I start with a sketch, and once I have the sketch the way I like it, the next step depends on the medium I'm using. So I'll take a sketch and I'll transfer it onto the final paper that I'm going to use using like a transfer paper that's kind of see-through, like a drafting paper. And then I'll, paint it or color it in with graphite or whatever medium I'm using. So,
And I
and
think
sometimes I do digital as well.
pardon?
Sometimes I do digital art as well, and that process is
Yeah.
pretty similar. Yeah.
And I think with the Megan Montaigne covers, which I'm putting up again, you did these in watercolor. Is that right?
No, I actually did those in acrylic and
Okay.
then I edited them in Photoshop. So I did a bit of digital painting on top of them.
And I just want to point out to everybody that crow is just so gorgeous. like I just, and I was like, did she actually draw that? Because it's so good. But you did. But you
Thank
do a
you.
lot of birds. How did you end up doing
Yes,
a lot of birds?
they're my favorite.
Are they?
I love birds. I think when people ask me how I got into illustration, I think it's because of birds. I was doing my undergrad degree and I had no idea where I was going with it, but I was able to take a bunch of ornithology classes that were literally like, let's go in the field and go bird watching. And your quiz is like, what's that bird over there? And it was so fun. And I had never looked at birds that intensely before. I never realized there were so many species of ducks. Like it kind of opened my whole world. And so birds are definitely my like gateway animal. So I just love drawing them. And, that kind of, I don't know how many people know, but I've done volunteer work and worked in museums, and it's the same there. I work on study skins, so working with birds up close. So they've just always been really fascinating to me. And the colors are
So
great.
pretty, right?
Yeah.
Let's talk about working with museums because you have such a broad spectrum of things that you do, and I'm not even really sure what. Like, do you have one thing that you usually like that's your main thing, or are you just everything, or what's your
What's my
what's your
deal?
CV?
Yeah, I'm all over the place. I like to call myself a natural history artist, mostly because I have so many interests and I can't pin any of it down. So when I say natural history artist, I like to incorporate natural history museum work in that.
Oh, you just froze. Are you still there, or am I frozen?
No,
Someone. There we are. Okay, you're
no,
back.
you good. Okay. Where did I cut off?
Uh, Yeah, I don't remember. I was panicking that you
Um,
froze.
yeah, so I do a lot of work, or I have done a lot of work with museums. And so when I was living in Australia, I was employed at the Queensland Museum for about a year working on a permanent exhibit that they were redoing. And that work involved taxidermy and exhibit design. But apart from that, I've only volunteered in museums.
Okay.
It's really hard to get paid work in museums. So, as much as I would like to be in that space, it's very difficult. And I have just moved. So, it's like starting over again. So, for the most part, I probably mostly do illustration. Um, and now that I've moved, I will hopefully get more involved with one of the museums here. But yeah, I guess museums and illustration and kind of those like old school natural history subjects are kind of like what I do and what's on my CV.
So let's just imagine that there's a Seattle area museum watching who's interested. What are you looking for? We're just gonna toss you out there. What do you want?
So I guess my ideal role would be working in a collection, probably a bird collection, and kind of working on study skins, which is like my favorite thing to do. So, for those who don't know, a study skin is literally a dead bird or mammal that is all the insides are removed and it's stuffed and preserved and it sits in a museum for researchers to use. So, I would love to have a role where I'm doing that, but also kind of outreach because I think, people have this association with dead things and they look at it really negatively. And some people see collections like that in museums and have this like knee jerk reaction of, oh my gosh, you killed all those things. How horrible. When in reality, nowadays, most of those specimens come in already dead. Like they're running into windows, they're attacked by cats, they're hit by cars, and they're like critical and crucial to scientific research. They're a great way for scientists to research animals that's super non-invasive. Like you might not have to go out in the field and catch animals. You can just use those collections. So I would love to kind of be a source of education on like why those collections are still important today and also how art relates to those collections because a lot of scientific illustrators use those collections to create their work. So they're an incredible resource that I think a lot of people don't even know about and they're not easily accessible. So yeah, my ideal role would be like kind of an art collection, education, outreach
Yeah.
person for a museum.
So if a school wanted to contact you, they could contact you directly, right? I'm just saying.
Yeah,
Like you
totally.
don't have the whole museum collection with you, but they could just contact you and you could talk with the kids. If anyone's out
Yeah.
there, so okay, you touched on something that we got to get into
Okay.
taxidermy.
Yeah.
Yes. So, and that I have so many questions, but were you, this is a weird way of putting it, but did you do it
Yeah.
intentionally? Like, did you want to get into taxidermy?
Yeah, again, it was like a weird thing that I had never really thought of, but was kind of always in the back of my mind, I think. So when I was younger, we lived in Chicago, and my mom actually worked at the Field Museum in the herpetology collection, which is reptiles and amphibians. So I grew up in this massive natural history museum that has like some of the best taxidermy displays and dioramas in the world. They're beautiful. But again, I never really like thought about it as a thing you could do. And then when I moved to Australia, I was like kind of lost, didn't know what to do, didn't have any connections. And I came across a woman who was running a taxidermy course,
Oh, wow.
like a day long taxidermy course. And it turned out that she was the taxidermist at the Queensland Museum, as well as another guy. So it was Allison Douglas and Todd Knight were running the workshop. And so I signed up and it was like the best day of my life. We just did quail taxidermy. So started from start to finish. We took the bird and skinned it and mounted it and had a finished product. And I loved it so much. And I convinced Allie to let me volunteer with her. And then after that, it was like, it's just my favorite
You're just
thing.
hooked. So, okay.
Yeah.
So if you're going to do you have a quail, or I'm just
Mm.
showing here, or a cassowary, or an echidna, or a
Yeah.
frogmouth, what's that? Frogmouth owl.
Yeah.
If you have one of those and someone's brought it in, it's dead, it's been sitting on the
Mm.
street, do you have to take the guts out? Is that part of taxidermy?
Yeah. Yeah, it
So
is.
tell me what happens. I bring you an echidna that I
Yeah.
killed and the echidna, for the people who don't know Australia, is it's the middle one there in the bottom. It looks kind of like a porcupine. It's a it's a marsupial, I think, if I remember from my own trip to Australia.
It's
Um,
actually a monotreme.
Pardon?
Um, it's a monotreme, so
A monotreme. That's
it's
right.
with yeah.
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 But tell people what a monotreme is.
I'm gonna mess up the like exact term, but platypi are also monotremes. So I think the definition is that
I think
I
they're
actually don't know
are
the
they egg laying mammals? I think they're egg
or
laying
are echidnas
mammals.
monotremes. Now I'm confusing myself, but I know platypuses are monotremes.
And
But yeah,
I think that platypus are out as well, because that came to my mind too. But it's
yeah,
platypus, echidna. There's a couple of them, but they're only in Australia,
uh,
right?
yeah.
Okay, so I brought you a monotreme, the echidna, that I killed on the
Uh,
side of the road accidentally, and you take it. And now what do you do?
so basically, to put it like as simply as possible, you kind of undress them. So um, people have this idea that when you're skinning something, it's going to be really gross and like
Yeah.
gory and lots of blood. But realistically, the insides of any animal are pretty intact, right? They're like within the muscle and they're all kind of in this like tube almost, especially for mammals. And
Okay.
your skin, this sounds so weird, but
No, I
your
have
skin
no clue.
will,
This is great.
yeah. So when you make an incision, like the initial incision, the skin will kind of peel off like you're taking off a sweater or something. Um, so yeah, that's basically the first step, like with birds or mammals, or even like some people do reptiles. You're going to make an incision and you kind of work the skin off of the body. So as long as you're not cutting too deep in, you're not going to have like guts and stuff spilling out.
Really?
So if you ever have like gone hunting and then you have to like butcher an animal, or even if you've prepared like a whole chicken or something at home,
These are
it's not too far off, so it's not as gross as people think.
I
But yeah, basically you remove the skin and then you take what you like the insides that you took out and you try and replicate them using synthetic materials because you don't want any like organic matter left inside because it'll rot over time.
mhm.
So you're basically taking the insides and sculpting them out of like foam, or people use like wood wool to kind of shape a body.
Okay. But
So
you're
you're
just going for the
basically
outer shape. You're not going for like, here's the liver and you just want the outer shape.
no.
Okay.
Just the general outer shape. Some things, depending on what you're working on, you will like define musculature and stuff, but that's normally in mammals, like bigger mammals. So yeah, you're sculpting the inside, and then if it's a mammal, you'll tan or treat the skin. With birds, you'll probably wash the skin, and then you just like kind of put the skin back onto the form and sew it up. That's a simplified version.
So I was just showing the pictures again. So that cassowary is
Yeah,
huge. Do you have
yeah,
someone working with you, or how does I mean? Because I can't imagine restuffing a cassowary by yourself.
yeah, yeah. So that was I was kind of like the assistant on that project. So I think the photo you showed has Alison Douglas in it, who she's the taxidermist at the Queensland Museum, one of them. And so that cassowary came in from a zoo, and yeah, it was very heavy. I don't remember the weight, but it was the two of us lifting it and putting it onto like a big surgical table, and we were both skinning it together because it was huge and like someone would have to hold the leg aside while you were trying to skin it. And then she actually worked with Todd Knight, the other taxidermist at the museum, and they took the inside body and they actually rigged it up so it looked like it was standing, like they built a big armature and basically like posed it and froze the body. And then they made a mold of that actual frozen carcass. So they made the inside by molding the actual body, and it was made out of fiberglass, so it's
Oh,
super light.
yeah.
So basically, once they had that interior bit made, when we put the skin on, you could pick up the cassowary like one person and move it because it was hollow. Um, but yeah, like bigger stuff. Like if you see really big taxidermied animals, like I don't know, big water buffalo and stuff, it's normally a team of people, like
I would hope
a
so.
taxidermy, yeah, a taxidermy business, or you have a really nice studio with like, a crane or something. Cause yeah, the bigger stuff is harder to work on for
Right?
sure. Yeah.
So when I'm hearing you describe it, I keep thinking like, do things not just fall off the skin? Like, does the
Mm.
beak not fall off? Do the feathers not, like, how does that, does it, it doesn't just peel off like perfectly, does it?
Um, it can. So basically, with taxidermy, you want the specimen to be as fresh as possible. If you find like roadkill that's been out in the sun for like a day and it smells really bad, it's not going to come out good because the skin starts to rot, and at that point the follicles open up and the hair will fall out.
Yeah.
So you can get specimens like working at the Queensland Museum. A lot of the stuff in their freezer has been in there for a while. So you would pull out a bird and it looks beautiful and you're like, this is going to be great. And you start working on it and you realize as it thaws that it was rotten and feathers start to fall out.
Yeah.
So if the specimen is kind of bad, or if it's like a bird that's molting, so it's losing its feathers and growing new ones,
Mm-hmm.
you can lose a lot of feathers or you can lose a lot of fur. But if you have a really nice specimen, that won't happen. It's pretty crazy how the feathers and the fur will stay in when you just peel the skin off.
And then they don't deteriorate. If you catch them when it's fresh, it doesn't
Mm.
deteriorate over time, like after it's.
Um, if it's done well, it shouldn't. I mean, eventually it probably will, depending on where it's being kept. But if taxidermy is done very well and the insides, like the skin, is cleaned and there's not a lot of fat or anything on it, basically nothing that can rot, the skin will dry and it just kind of, especially bird skin, it just kind of like dries like tissue paper. And so there's really nothing there that could go off. If you keep it in an environment that's like damp or there's pests, something could start eating it or it could get mold. But realistically, really clean, nice taxidermy can last like over 100 years.
Do you use chemicals or anything?
Yeah, so with mammals, you tan the skin for most mammals. So it's like the same process as just tanning like a cowhide. So yeah, there are chemicals involved in that, but it's basically like a pickle in a tanning solution. With birds, you don't have to use any chemicals. You can just use like dish soap to wash the skin and dry it out. Some people do use different chemicals or like formaldehyde in the feet to preserve them, but it's a lot less toxic than it used to be. Old taxidermy people used to use like arsenic and stuff to preserve.
It's good for
So
murder
yeah,
mysteries. I should keep that in mind.
yeah, it's actually important to remember if you're like a taxidermy collector and you didn't know, if you're buying like old taxidermy, you should wear gloves and maybe even a mask if you're buying stuff and like putting it in your house because it could have arsenic in it if it's older and it will just come out. And once you're exposed to arsenic, it like never leaves your body. So
How,
yeah, so you do
oh,
have to be careful.
well, so first of all, my sister just wrote a taxidermist friend told us if it's fresh enough to eat, it's okay to taxidermy.
Mm-hmm.
But that's an interesting point about the old, because so in my family, we have, or my sister has, um, back from when it was still legal to kill them, a snowy white owl
Oh,
that has
wow.
been stuffed. Its name is Fred. Pretty sure
Mm.
she named him, not me. But how long ago would they have arsenic? Because Fred's old.
Yeah, I used to know the date, but I would I'm probably going to be wrong, but I would say anything older than like the 1940s, maybe even 50s. Like you just should be careful. And some people in the UK still use an arsenic paste, a very small amount, but it is still kind of used. But yeah, I definitely say anything older than the 40s, you should be careful.
I'm sure that Fred is older than that. So how do you
Yeah.
find out? Like, how would you find
Um,
out if there's?
yeah, there are readers you can use. I know some of the bigger museums have like really fancy readers. I don't know how they work, but they'll use them on old taxidermy mounts. Um, I don't know. Generally, if you have an old piece of taxidermy and it looks like there's like kind of white powder coming out of it, you could probably assume it's arsenic. It could also be borax, which is something people still use now that's not as toxic. But like just to be on the safe side, if you see like white material coming out of it that kind of looks like snow, I'd be careful.
Okay,
Yeah.
that makes me also wonder, how do you clean taxidermied things?
Yeah. I'm probably not the best person to answer that because there are trained natural history conservators, kind of like there are art conservators. There are people who really know their stuff about cleaning old taxidermy mounts. Um, Basically, depending on the mount, there's only so much you can do because if you like wet it down too much, you could potentially ruin the tanning of the skin.
Yeah.
With birds, I think birds might be a little bit easier to clean. A lot of people use like say the snowy owl, if it looks like there's like kind of soot or something on it. Some people will blot like ethanol onto the feathers just very gently. You don't want to rub because it might like rub it in. But ethanol is a really popular cleaning solution. But one of the best things is just like keep it in a space that is kind of climate controlled. Um, you can kind of vacuum them a little bit. You have to be very careful.
Yeah.
A lot of people you'll put like a little filter on the top of the vacuum so you're not like sucking the feathers or the fur in.
Right. Yeah.
Or like you kind of brush the dust into the vacuum that you're holding off of the mount.
Okay.
Yeah, but the best maintenance is like upfront maintenance versus getting a mount that's really dirty.
Yeah.
Those are hard to clean, and that's where I would contact like a conservator who could do it professionally.
So do you have taxidermy at your house?
I do. I don't have it up,
That's okay.
but I have a taxidermy duck,
Yeah.
and then I have this like this bison skull up here.
I think
um,
it's off the
oh, can
screen
you
for
not see
Skype.
it?
There you
Right
go.
there.
Nice.
um, but yeah, I'm not a huge taxidermy collector, and I think that's mostly because I get really specific about it. Like it has to look really good for me to have it. I think eventually I would like to collect more of like some of the taxidermists I admire. I'd like to buy some of their work. But yeah, I don't have that much at the
So between
moment.
taxidermy and scientific illustration,
Mm.
love them both equally. Like I'm just trying to figure out where do we fit here?
Yeah. I think I probably like taxidermy a bit more. It brings me a little less stress.
Oh,
um,
really? And how does?
yeah, I think it's because when I'm doing illustration, I feel like there's so many points where I can mess up, and it's really all on me to be creating this final product.
Yeah.
Whereas taxidermy, I'm working with the actual thing. So as long as I get it to look semi like what it looks like in the wild, I'm not having to like paint the details of the feathers or
Yeah.
anything. Like that already exists. So my job is only to make it look like it did when it was alive. Whereas illustration, I have to do everything.
Right.
And I think it's just, I think I know I like taxidermy more because when I'm working on taxidermy, I get really sucked into it. I'll go like all day and I'm like, oh, I haven't eaten anything today. Whereas illustration, I'll sit down and I work on it for 30 minutes and I'm like, I can't do
I
this
can't do
anymore. And
this
I have to,
anymore.
I have to
Yeah.
get up and do something. And so, yeah,
Well,
probably taxidermy.
but you always have to do my covers as long as Megan Montaigne's around.
Exactly.
No matter what, I just want to put
I'll do
that
it.
in there.
It's okay.
So how do people find you for scientific illustration? Like how do you, is there like I was going to say, trying to, my words are gone. It's Sunday. It's not the week yet.
That's
Um,
okay.
is there a grapevine? Like, how do people find you?
Yeah, so it kind of depends. I have a website, which is madisonerinmayfield.com. So people can contact me through that. Sometimes people find me through Instagram. Twitter has actually gotten me quite a bit of work because there are a lot of scientists on Twitter. I'll tweet something and then they're like, I need an illustration for this research project. So Twitter's actually been really great that way. But
I think that's where
yeah,
I
there's a
found you, right?
probably, yeah, you probably found me through Kaylee on
Yeah.
Twitter. Yeah. Um, there are a few websites where there's like directories of scientific illustrators. Um, for a while, I was working on a project with a friend to try and create a like better directory for scientific illustrators so that if anyone wanted one, they could like search through people's work. Um, but yeah, I would say if you're looking for a scientific illustrator, it helps to try and find one in your area or maybe someone who illustrates things like that you like. So I like to work on birds a lot, so I probably wouldn't be the best person for like a dinosaur illustration. I do it, but there are better people. So it's kind of knowing what you want before you reach out to an illustrator
Yeah.
for sure.
So, like, if a person wanted like a suitcase or a climbing wall, these would be
Exactly.
outside of
I,
your realm.
it's really good. It pushes me because, if I wanted to, I could just only illustrate birds forever, but then, I wouldn't have the opportunity to work on other stuff. Um, so yeah, it goes both ways. It's like I'll illustrate something, I really don't say no, but there are certain things like medical illustration and stuff that I'm just probably not the most qualified for. There are people who actually do like master's degrees in that.
Hmm.
So yeah,
So, have you done like textbooks, or where does your art show up?
I'm all over the place. Actually, I have done some textbook illustrations that were like for a chemistry textbook. So, not even that detailed stuff. I've done parasite life cycle illustrations. I've done stuff that's been published in scientific papers. But then I seem to do a lot of like kind of logo and I guess outreach illustrations for like conservation um, groups or researchers. And then I also just sometimes do like private commissions for people. So I'm kind of all over the place. I really enjoy working with scientists. I enjoy illustrating something that's going to make their research more accessible to the public because I think that's really like we need a lot of that right now. We need science to be easier and more approachable
For
for
sure.
people who don't do science.
Yeah.
But yeah, my stuff, I've done kind of the full spectrum.
What is your favorite drawing you've done and your favorite taxidermy you've done?
Ooh, that's so hard. My favorite taxidermy is probably that family of tawny frogmouths. I think I sent you a photo. It was the
They're
first
so
project.
cute.
Yeah, it was the first project that Allison Douglas at the Queensland Museum, I came in and she was like, here's a frogmouth, you can do it. And here's some babies and you can do them. And she just gave me like she just had faith in me to just do them. So I got to make a little like story of them sitting on a log together. And then she was like, we're putting that on display.
Oh,
So
yay.
yeah, it was so fun to work on. It was like the first kind of mount I got to do that kind of told a story, I guess. And it's now on display in the Queensland Museum. So I'm really proud of that one.
Awesome.
Um, as far as my favorite illustration,
Aside from
I
Megan
don't,
Montaigne.
aside from your cover art, I don't know if I can pick one. I'm trying to think. Uh, I got to do some really cool carassiformes, which are like the kingfisher family.
Okay.
I might have sent you that image as well. Super colorful birds. And that was published in a journal and it was used in like a family tree, like a phylogeny. And that was just fun to work on because the birds were so colorful. And I don't think I had ever done something with that much color before. So that was a nice change.
That's fun.
Yeah. Yeah.
When you went to Australia, were you going there for a job, or did you get a job once you were there?
I got a job once I was there. I moved for a boy, which I never thought I would do. But yeah, I moved there with nothing lined up, which in hindsight was a really bad idea. It was really difficult, especially considering the fact that I moved there on a tourist visa, or it was like a working holiday visa, so it only lasts for a year, and you can only work for up to 6 months. So anyone who I was trying to apply for work, they were like, "Well, you're going to leave,"
Right.
and I was like, "No, I'm going to stay for 4 years if I can get a visa."
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, in a way, it really pushed me to make more connections,
Yeah.
and I do think it ended up working out because I got into the Queensland Museum, and it honestly was like the best 4 years of my life. And I owe like all of it to Allison Douglas, that she was like, "Oh yeah, sure, you can come volunteer." And then
That's awesome.
she really like advocated for me, because it's really hard to get into museums, especially now because of COVID. It's hard to volunteer because,
Right.
they don't want a bunch of people in the space. And even then you have to volunteer for a long time before there's paid work, which really sucks. Um, but yeah, the biggest thing I got out of it was really making connections and showing up as much as you can, and really emphasizing how much you like what you're doing, because people will see that enthusiasm and be like, "Okay, maybe we can pay her for something."
So is it hard to get into museums because there's no money, or because there's so much competition, or because all of the above?
Kind of all of the above. It's probably mostly funding. A lot of museums just don't have, well, they kind of don't allocate their budget the way they probably should. And as a result, there's not a lot of full time or even part time positions. And the ones that are available, you kind of have to have like a PhD or an upper level degree, plus like a million years of experience. And it's that whole thing of, well, how do I get that? If I've never had a job, how do I get the experience?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's kind of a messed up industry in that it does require a lot of years up front where you might not even be paid, and that alone makes it really exclusive. Only the people who can, support themselves financially can afford to dedicate so many days volunteering. And even people who go to school for years and get degrees in like museum studies, then it is competitive because everyone's applying to the same job, and also people who get museum jobs never want to leave them because they're amazing. So you have a lot of positions that someone has been in that role for like 40 years,
My
and so
gosh.
there's only so many jobs. They last a really long time. So yeah, there's not a lot of turnover. And yeah, it's very hard when people ask me how to get into museums. I have to be very
Yeah.
honest, and
I'm
it's a
not going
really
to tell
hard
you
thing
because I
to do.
want to get in too.
I know it's hard because at the Queensland Museum, I volunteered a lot. After my paid role there was over, I was like, well, I'll keep showing up because maybe they'll pay me for something else now.
Yeah.
But they didn't. And in like doing the work for free, I was basically showing them that they don't have to pay
Right.
me, but at the same time, I want to do it and
Yeah.
I need the experience. So I'm one of the people who's like perpetuated this idea of like, oh, well, we can just have volunteers do it, when really you should be paying the people for the work. So it's really hard to figure out.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, that's the same
Yeah.
with books. There's a whole, should we give books away for free? And well, on the one hand, people expect books for free now, but on the other hand, if you give them away for free, then people don't expect them for free. So it's
Exactly.
challenging. But
Yep.
and also we're getting close to time here. But you
Mm.
also are a rock climber, or have done rock climbing, right? Tell me about
I wouldn't
this.
call myself that. I did used to go bouldering quite a bit, and I think we climbed at the same gym for a
Right.
while.
Yes.
Yeah, my partner's actually climbing there right now.
Is he? Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
awesome.
But I
So
haven't done it in a while.
I'm gonna have to ask you about that offline because I'm curious how the gym is because of COVID.
Mm,
I just
yeah.
built, or I had help building a climbing gym in my garage. So
Oh,
so
cool.
fun. I'm just loving it.
Nice.
But I loved it because it was so helpful. Because when I had you do Sent to Death, I'm going to put the book covers up one more time. But I had you do that and you totally knew everything you needed to know about like the holds and like what the different things
Yeah.
were. And so it's
Yeah.
been a really perfect marriage between
Yeah.
artist and author. Well,
Yeah, totally. It's been
tell
great.
us again. So where, go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead.
I was going to say, tell us again where we find you. I have madisonerinmayfield.com,
Hmm.
Instagram, Madison Erin Mayfield, and Twitter,
Yep.
MEM Illustration.
Yep.
So if
And people
people
can,
see you and they're like, I want art, like, is it always worth contacting you, or there's things people should contact? Okay, just give it a try.
yeah, you can contact me. Sometimes I am just like horrible at responding. I don't have an online shop, so a lot of people ask about prints. I'm not doing that at the moment just because it is a lot of work and I just moved, so I don't really know where to make them yet. So no prints or shop at the moment. But if people want commissions or just have questions about illustration or how to work with an illustrator, they can just email me or message me on Instagram or Twitter, and I will hopefully respond.
And if teachers or other educators are looking for a scientific uh, person to explain all sorts of things. So do you, when
Yeah.
you're working as an education person, and like, how would you, what would you give? Because I'm assuming you're not going to be telling them
Mm,
here's how to draw, but you could,
mm.
what would you, what would role would you have?
It kind of depends. Like I have run illustration workshops that were like intro to illustration. So it's kind of like the basics, how to observe, how to draw. Um, and then I've also just given talks about like the relationship between illustration and taxidermy, um, how to become a scientific illustrator, what we do. So yeah, I won't just sit there and like talk at you and teach you how to draw. But I have done workshops where I can kind of like give you the tools and have worksheets about like the basics of illustration. And then, always happy to just talk about it as a job or what I do.
Talking with kids, we're going to get you hooked up
Yeah.
with some schools. I'm going to
Yeah,
make it
that would
happen.
be great. I've always wanted to do that. I've really only kind of done that with adults, but I think it's so important for kids to observe. And like when you start drawing nature, you just want to pay attention to it more. So I think it's such a good tool even for people who don't want to go into illustration. So it should be something that everyone learns.
Well, and I'm just fascinated that you didn't grow up drawing because you're so good.
Yeah,
So
thank you.
that tells me that there's hope for all of us.
Yeah, exactly.
Or we could just hire you because you're so
There you
good.
go.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Well, Madison, again, you have been such a joy to have working on my books. Like, it's just, whenever I hire someone new, I'm always like, I hope it works out. And you've been
Yeah,
so great. And every time I get the art, I'm just like, oh, it's perfect. I love it so much. So thank you for that.
thank
I'm
you.
working on a different book, not a Megan Montaigne one, but we'll work on another Megan Montaigne one soon. And also, I'm going to have Megan, or I'm going to have Megan. You're not Megan, you're Madison. You have the same initials, though.
Yeah,
Um,
I know.
I'm going to have Madison redo final chapter so that all four books look the same. But the pandemic sort of tapped out my brain, and I was like, I can't handle that right now. But the books
Yeah.
all will look the same soon, and I have to figure out, I think maybe a swimming pool for that cover. So start thinking about swimming pools. so,
Fun.
so thank you again. Anything else you want to
Yeah.
tell for the good of the order?
Oh, I don't think so. I think, you know, try sketching something you
Sketching.
see.
Excellent. Well, and we'll have to meet up now that you're in Seattle once there's
Yes,
no more COVID,
definitely.
which
Yeah,
so
eventually.
right. Well, thank you, Madison. Have a great
Yeah, thank
afternoon,
you.
and thank you everyone for coming and joining us today. Next week I have Molly. Molly Ringwald is not her name. Molly Ringel. She's another author who is going to be coming to talk about her latest book that's coming out and writing in general. So, thank you, Madison. I'll be in touch again
Thank you.
soon. Bye. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.